Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lorber. I'm the director of Rain Taxi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 20th Twin Cities Book Festival. We're online, of course, instead of in our usual outpost at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds, but we're happy to be here, and there is a lot we can do together to enjoy this. We have 19 terrific author events like this one to share with you. We've also got a handful of pre-recorded presentations in our Minnesota Author Mashup and our new chapbook launch. And of course, there's an exciting exhibit hall filled with publishers and organizations and authors who all want to share what their latest releases are with you and offer you some good deals on them as well. We know if you poke around, you'll find a lot to love on our new festival website. I hope you'll do that. And for now, I'm delighted to introduce our next poetry showcase, one of my personal favorites of the event. We have with us some amazing authors. Yona Harvey, a poet that I first read when I encountered her terrific first book a few years ago, Hemming the Water. She now has a new collection out called You Don't Have to Go to Mars for Love. Indeed. And I also want to mention, because I'm a comics fan, that she's one of the first Black women writers to work for Marvel Comics, and in fact was awarded an Eisner Award for her contribution to World of Wakanda. We also have with us Ted Mathys, a one-time Minnesotan author. Today he's coming to us from St. Louis, Missouri. I guess we'll share. He has 3 books of poetry published by Minnesota's own Coffeehouse Press, and a 4th one has just been released. That's called Gold Cure. We were scheduled to have native poet Linda Hogan join us as well for this conversation. We're having some technical difficulties getting her in from her outpost in Colorado, but we may be able to get her on screen or on audio soon, so stay tuned. Moderating our session is our dear friend, wonderful Minnesota poet, Kris Bigalk. Kris is not only a poet, but I would say a community activist who helps many others thrive here in the literary community. And I'm delighted that she can lead this conversation with her fellow poets today. I want to remind all our audience members that our online format allows you to ask questions there at the bottom of your screen. You can buy books by any of the authors or all of them. And of course, you can donate. Rain Taxi is nonprofit. We're thrilled to bring you this festival for free. But if you can contribute, every dollar we raise goes toward us planning our next Twin Cities Book Festival for 2021, whatever that may look like. For now, welcome to you all, and take it away, Kris.
Thanks, Eric. I'm so happy to be here with the 3 of you. And I was so excited to get copies of your books. You know, it's always exciting to get copies of books when they're like brand new babies and no one else has seen them, and you feel so honored and special. And when I was reading through all of your books, it just kept coming back to me how timely they all are as far as addressing issues that are going on in our world, our very complicated, strange new world. So what I'd like to do is begin by inviting you to, I'll kind of call on you because there's so many people and we can't see Linda and stuff, so it'll just be easier, I think, to do that. And I'll ask you to talk a little bit about the book in general, and then I've asked you all to read a specific poem from your book. And it's up to you if you want to introduce that poem or not. I know people have strong feelings about that, so I don't want to pressure you to do that if you don't want to. So I think we'll begin with Yona. Would you please talk about your new book?
Sure. First of all,
Go to Mars for Love.
Thanks.
And share that poem with us. That would be wonderful.
Fantastic. It's my honor to be here among such distinguished poets. Thank you so much. What I'd say about You Don't Have to Go to Mars for Love is it just experiments a little bit with the past, present, and future coexisting, which I guess is tied into Afrofuturism and ideas like that. So I'm just trying to have conversations across time with people. And the poem I'm going to read is Boy in the Forest Between Living and Leaving. And this poem was inspired by a lot of things. My son moving from the age 11 to becoming a teenager and getting very tall, the murder of Trayvon Martin, the storytelling of folklorist and writer Virginia Hamilton, and then also the artwork of Leo and Diane Dillon. They do a lot of the covers for her work. Okay, Boy in the Forest Between Living and Leaving, after Virginia Hamilton. That time, when boys who were down said down, and dressed in such a way that their out-of-school clothes resembled their night and day clothes and play clothes, and on the court or on the field clothes, those don't want to be like them clothes. That time, one boy walked alongside the dark in his dark knee-length shorts and bulb-bright shirt that inflated and deflated whenever the wind entered or exited the sleeves, as if to say, when puffed, this is the man he will become, and when shrunken, but he is only on the verge now. And it appeared as if a narrow flame were flaring and flickering and walking or floating alongside a long stretch of road. There were no street signs or landmarks, just the dark stretching away from itself and the boy walking off, walking away rather than toward anyone or anything, though maybe that's the way it felt when one watched another walking from a distance. The boy kept moving, and each time it seemed as though he might stop to check if he were headed in the right direction, or wipe his hands on his shirt, or listen for rickety trucks or long rope troubles that wickedly come. The boy never stopped. Not even to pull his shoestrings tighter, which wouldn't have mattered because he wore no shoes or socks. And the patch of trees ahead outblacked the sky and announced themselves and bent and swore, "We are safe trees." For they knew their branches had been defiled and low-hanging and long broken and eased into. The earth, the trees were weary from what they had seen, from how they had been used, and could not account for the crimes of men who had not yet atoned. So they bent their leaf-thick heads and revealed a new path for the boy, that he might make his way to live alongside long-living boys. And just like that, the boy was in a forest, and the road disappeared behind him, and the boy walked further toward the shelter of more trees, away from the doomed and damned and hunted and heckled and haunted and haunted and hounded and slaughtered and drowned and weighed at the river bottom. The boy outflamed the flame he was becoming. Other boys alongside other boys. He appeared to be so many. He swore to sequoia and redwood, "I will not burn you." And it was true. He would not raise, though the boy had brightened the lives of the ones he loved and left through a hole in his chest. And he walked right through and upward grew. And he knew he could walk the length of Florida, Texas, Missouri, Ohio, New York, California, and back again. One day, soon is now sun, rise up singing. One day, soon is now sun, rise up singing. One day, soon sun is now sun. Rise up, singing, one day, soon is today sun. Rise up, swinging, one day, soon is now sun. Rise up, swinging, one day, soon is now sun. Rise is today, sun. Rise up, swinging and swinging. He could hear singing on the other side, though he knew he was gone.
Oh, that was so beautiful, Yona. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we'll move to Ted now. Ted's new collection, Gold Cure. I hope it looks right to you. Yep, you've got it too. Please tell us about the book and read your poem for us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Yona, for that beautiful poem. And Linda, it's great to read with you, and thank you, Kris. I also want to thank everybody for coming. It's really lovely. So Gold Cure has several different kinds of poems in it, but the kind of through line of the book is about gold as a heavy metal, but also as a kind of a cultural ideal, and in some ways a kind of philosophical concept. So many of the poems in the book ruminate on gold and meditate on gold in its various permutations and expressions, and gold's sort of idiomatic role in American culture. Some of the poems are place-based, set in gold mines or towns across America named El Dorado, which of course was a kind of mythical town in South America that Europeans and conquistadors thought was a city of gold, but of course never existed, and was the impetus for a lot of kind of murderous westward expansion. And so the poem I'm going to read is called Gold Dredge. It's one of the place-based poems, and it's set in a valley in eastern Oregon, near the border with Idaho, called Sumter. And there's an old abandoned gold dredge. And dredges were new to me, but I visited this town. It's kind of an old, empty gold mining ghost town. A dredge is a kind of big apparatus that had a big arm that would dig into a valley and pull gold-flecked rocks through its mechanisms. And it required water, and therefore it would often have its own pond that as it crawled up the valley, it would pull along with itself. This one was abandoned in the mid-20th century, but it was operational on and off from about 1914 to 1937. And it's also reputed to be haunted. This poem is called Gold Dredge. Fog white, bulky as a 5-story factory, the dredge is shipwrecked in its own pond. Atlantis, not sunken, but abandoned. I lean on a railing in the winch room. A bead of sweat drips from my nose to an acquisitive minnow that flashes to greet it. The pond is ringed by dead men, pines and firs to which cables were stretched to steady the hull from bow and stern. For decades it crawled, pivoting on its spud as the buckets gnawed through acreage, digesting rock and the swirling trommel, flushing the slurry through sluices, dragging its pond along as hostage, pausing for war and resuming again with an increase in the price of gold, leaving a trail of tailings down the valley like the path of slime behind a slug. Dead men are reflected in the water that the boilers thawed each winter. A blossom blown from a stalk of mullein disturbs the surface tension. The pale figure of the dredge master ripples in the syntax of minnows. His smile widens to silent laughter as he raises a wooden riffle caked with black sand and heavy metals. He lifts his tongue to flash me the gold coin, spit slicked and placed there after his death, a small denomination to pay the ferryman to pole him across the river in a skiff. A wildfire high in the Elkhorn Mountains has burned for days. The advancing mass of smoke and ash wraps the foothills and slides through stands of dead men like an exhalation after long-held breath.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. What I really loved about that poem is I felt like it was such a great poem just as a poem, but I felt like I learned so much. You know, I mean, it was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to Linda. Linda, can you come on and I guess we don't know if we're going to be able to see Linda's face, but I think we'll be able to hear her. She actually has 2 new books out. She has this book, Poems, History of Kindness. And then this book just came out, The Radiant Lives of Animals, which is a prose book. So Linda, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, yes. Can you talk about
Good.
your book, The History of Kindness, and then read that poem for us, please?
Well, the History of Kindness has a section. My favorite section in it is based on historical events. It's the Old Mother section. And it goes from our indigenous lives here as a cross-continent group of human beings and lives lost, from the Old Mother teaching me about, you know, the massacres, where they were planned, which is close to where I live. The Sand Creek Massacre was planned just down the hill and across the creek. And she says she's happy there's a mountain between me and the words. And so it's based on the power of words and the power of language, politically and historically, and in terms of how we grow internally with our consciousness into a new kind of people, which we have no choice at this time in our lives to become. And so it takes in the beginning. There is a lot of my own tribal history in it, and a lot from my children who belong to another tribe. They're from South Dakota. They live there. And I'm a Chickasaw from Oklahoma, and they're Oglala Lakota. It had to do with enrollment and numbers and things like that, which is what is so strange, is that we're numbers. Not long ago at Standing Rock, the caged had numbers written on their arms, and yet the children who are being separated from their parents now do not have identification. So it's a very interesting and complicated order, or disorder, I should say, the times that we live in. So I don't know how much you want me to say about it, but it is about kindness. It's about gentleness, compassion toward all life on earth. And I noticed that in both of the other poets, that there is that yearning also toward the same sense of things environmentally, in terms of, you know, what trees were safe or not safe, and yet there was no safety anywhere. And, you know, I loved listening to them. I wish I could take notes, but it would make noise. So here I am with this poem, The Current Veins of History. The current veins of history are open as worlds and borders redefine themselves. We wish for some new seed of vision, so the world may grow, if only for a moment, silent, wordless, and fresh as a bare room with windows open. Friend, even you I may never know. None of us are alike. We are in the same rushing current of life. However, each one with our one-celled beginning, primordial life opening to step out towards years with stories of those who birthed us. We hope flowing with love, even with childhoods of hurt from being human. And for a time, it all seems fine. In this moment of stopping, in the room safe with curtains billowing, for just this moment, can't we touch one another and ask about our lives? Even the earth knows these veins that run like rivers of sweet water into countries, great one day, gone the next, or flowing into one another to create something new. As we are silent in this moment, to be a friend, no weapon, not even arrows of words, just easy human waters together. Be like the animal that opens hardness and carries inside a pearl or a goddess that steps out to a new human accord.
Thank you so much, Linda. I have to say, when I read that poem, I thought, what a perfect poem for this time. You know, it just was incredibly moving. Ted
Thank
and
you.
Yona, you can unmute. I'd like to just kind of piggyback on something Linda said, and that is that your collections are very different in their tones, in a lot of the subject matter. You know, they're very different, but they all do have that one thing in common, which is an utter respect and reverence for the natural world. I would say, and you know, Ted, by pointing out the destruction of a lot of this natural world, you know, I think that, you know, you're pointing out what people have done to it, and Linda, there's so much reverence for the natural world, but also I think you hit on that topic, as do you, Yona. In yours in particular, Yona, I saw a real use of nature as a refuge. Do you feel like that's a recurring theme for you?
Probably, yes. I think it's there's a tension between that. It is a refuge, but it can also be a terrifying place, depending on, I don't know, the people you may encounter there. So for me, there's always that push and pull. So
Yeah,
particularly in that poem that I read, just thinking about that, a child who's in danger, who's going to lose his life, but who's also worried about the trees catching fire. So
yes, yeah. And how about you, Ted? You know, how did you feel about your perceptions or your presentations, I guess, of nature in your work?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think one of the things I was interested in this book that departs a little bit from some of my previous writing that has engaged with nature is the relationship between the visible and the invisible, or the surface and the subsurface. So I have a crown of sonnets in the book about fracking, about hydrological fracturing for gas and oil, which is in my mind, is a kind of eschatological project going back into the deepest, oldest places on earth to extract value in the contemporary capitalist nightmare. And there's literally no further back you can go in geologic time than these shale deposits from which we're extracting natural gas and oil. And similarly with gold mining, there's something interesting to me about gold as a heavy metal and a substance that comes to Earth from, you know, an asteroid bombardment, and there's a finite amount of it on Earth, but we go to these exceptional lengths as humans to find it and extract it and transform it. And so its kind of mutability reminds me like oil, you know, black gold and natural gas in some ways as these almost ghost-like or spectral-like substances that draw humans into you know, horrible situations vis-a-vis the surface. So I was kind of thinking about that surface and subsurface, or visibility and invisibility in the book.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, it was really fun to read both of these books back to back, I have to say, because I felt like there were some themes and even some particular animals that I saw in common between the two collections. But I wanted to just mention in The Radiant Lives of Animals, the interesting story that you told about the rattlesnake with no rattles, and that theme of evolution being affected by human beings. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, yes, and it's happening with elephants too, who are coming into the world with no tusks so that they won't be attacked and killed by people, although they still are, because they're trophy hunters who just find pleasure in hunting or killing for some reason that I never understood, but they do somehow. And so the rattlesnakes are, my granddaughter is working in environmental sciences as well. I'm sorry for my cat. He thinks he should get his way and sit on my lap. So anyway, the rattlesnakes are coming into the world without rattles, because the original thing that I heard was that they were being extincted by people who are afraid of them, or in Texas where they're doing rattlesnake kills. But then my granddaughter said that she thought that they were mating with rattlesnakes, and so some of those matings were for the same reason, to survive, but also that those were taking place. So there are two reasons that that could be happening. But it's interesting because in a time when species are diminishing so quickly, so rapidly, that we have, just in the short time we've been talking, we couldn't even count how many are missing in that time. And to me, that is standing out. And so here was a rattlesnake that killed one of my animals, and I picked it up, and I thought it was not a rattlesnake because it didn't have rattles. But by then it had no toxin left. It put it all into the animal that it bit. And so apparently this is common here. I don't know what else to say about it. It's just, I think that evolution is speeding up in a new way. Kris,
Yeah,
I don't see you anymore.
I just want to encourage, yeah, I would love to encourage everyone to buy the books of all these authors. To do that, you can see a little buy books button underneath our pictures. Also, I'd love it if anybody has questions for the poets. You can click on that ask a question link, or you can even just stick it in the chat, and the chat moderator will let me know what your questions are as well. I had originally wanted to talk to you about poetry as news, because I felt like your books all kind of address newsy items, I guess. And there's a famous quote from William Carlos Williams that says, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." And of course, Ezra Pound also has a famous quote about this too: "Poetry is news that stays news." What is it about poetry that people need, not just to live, but to live better? Do any of you want to go first on that one? Go ahead, Yona.
I think, I don't know, a lot of things, but you know, some kind of affirmation, not necessarily agreed upon beliefs, but just an extra set of ears and eyes and alertness, you know, a sense that someone else is seeing and hearing things, whatever they may be, drones, political statements made, etc., you know, and wanting to process that, you know, just wanting some kind of camaraderie around the processing of and response to these things that people are witnessing. Essentially, am I crazy? Please tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you're seeing this too.
Not crazy. I guess, you know, one thing that I guess I was very much discouraged as a younger poet from writing about anything like that. I didn't feel like, I mean, I don't know why, but I didn't feel like those topics were gonna work, or that I would get good feedback. You know, when you're younger, you care more about that. And so I always have had the utmost respect for people who just take that on and go with it. And I've gotten better at it as I've been older, but I was thinking, why didn't I do that when I was younger? And I don't think a lot of people did. I mean, back in the 80s, maybe, I don't know, but it wasn't the kind of stuff that I was reading in graduate school. And so, you know, I really think it's great that now, I mean, really any topic's open, but to also have such incredibly artful, amazing work coming out of it, I think is really great, and the utmost respect for you all for doing that. How about you, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, it's very likely that I could be misunderstanding both the Pound and the Williams, but my sense is that they're drawing a distinction between news as we think of it in a traditional sense of journalism and things that come and go, and then that poetry offers things that have greater degrees of permanence. And I think there's something to that, even if you're writing about political events or the environment, in that I'm drawn to poetries that provide me with a kind of perceptual attention or perceptual acuity to my surroundings or events, and that, like Linda's work and like Yona's work, also have a really palpable sense of history that kind of pushes up through whatever is being observed and written about. And so I think that poetry, if it's news or relevant in that newsy way, sometimes it's that it can provide us ways to see the past in the present, and to feel the textures of objects and emotions in the events that we're writing about. So yeah, I mean, I like going to poetry to experience the past sort of pushing up through the images and pushing up through the events that are being described.
Okay. And how about you, Linda?
Well, I'm trying to think of it as news, because sometimes the news becomes the poetry. But for me, it's like a inherent shift in how I look at the world. When I read a really amazing poem, you know, it stays with me forever. And And it changes me. It opens me to a new insight, a new way of being and looking at the world and understanding what it is to be a different human than what I was before I read it. And no, Yona, you're not crazy. Nobody who writes poetry like that is crazy. Don't worry.
Right.
That was the
I might be a little crazy.
amazing. Yeah, that was really
Well,
made me
enough to write poetry.
You know. But when I first discovered poetry, I mean, it changed my entire life because I worked I wasn't from a family of book people, and we had no books in the house, and I just discovered poetry and contemporary poetry, not the old stuff that we used in school in my time. I know now people read contemporary poetry, but I was born in 1947 and we read, you know, Poe and people like that. But not that they're terrible. I don't want to make judgment on anybody's work, but the old poets were different. And when I discovered contemporary poetry, it just changed my entire life. I started doing it because it so touched me and so moved me in ways I didn't know could happen. And yes, some of it was the news, but some of it was also news to me inherently, internally, that I could read James Wright's poem, The Blessing, and then feel at the end that, yes, I could break into blossom, you know, from just reading the poem. And then because I work in the country and I'm, you know, putting in a pasture right now and just working really hard, I always think of William Carlos Williams, you know, so much depends upon, do I have the right poet? So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow. And I think every day that poem comes to me when I'm out there, you know, like starting to put in, amending the soil next year. And, you know, thinking, oh, so much depends on that wheelbarrow. So, yeah, it's the news, but it's more than the news. The news, we don't even know what the news is anymore. So it's news that is real, honest, deep, and humane in a way that we are learning.
Yeah.
Sorry if
well,
I
we
went on
are
too long.
running a little short of time. No, I'd stay here for another hour if I could. But we do have an audience question, and so I think I want to skip to that one, and then I'll end with, if we have time, I'll end with one of my other questions. But Trevor's asking, what are some of your favorite literary devices to use within your poetry? Like, do you have a fave?
For all of us?
I think I'll start with Ted because, Ted.
Yes.
I noticed that your sonnets were a little different than the kind that I'd written.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your fractured sonnets.
Well, so I was gonna mention something about form. I'm drawn in terms of literary devices. I like forms, both inherited forms like sonnets, but also nonce forms that the poet creates in the process of writing and then adheres to their own rules. Sometimes those forms allow me to discover things in the process of writing that I think otherwise wouldn't come out. In the sonnets that I was writing, I'm teaching a course on sonnets right now, so I'm really excited about sonnets. But they have a loose Petrarchan scheme. So the first 8 lines, the octave has closed rhymes. They're kind of highly pressurized rhymes, and then they kind of release in the sestet. Petrarch used those for a kind of amorous project, right? When he's writing to the beloved, there would be a question or a statement in the octave, and then a kind of release in the sestet or a resolution. For me, I was interested in fracking as a kind of environmental process that relies on subsurface pressure. So each of the sonnets are titled after one of the major 14 shale plays or shale deposits around the continental United States. And that's how I thought of sonnets. I was reading about fracking, and I used to work in environmental policy, and we were doing a lot of anti-fracking work. And then as a poet, I discovered that there were 14 shale plays, and it was like, duh, you know, obviously you're going to write a crown of sonnets. But yeah, so I like the relationship between and content because the octaves have a kind of high sort of subsurface pressure that's then released in sort of like that natural gas or oil shooting up from the wellhead. So I like formal constraints.
I'm so excited because I thought that when I was reading them, I thought this is like meta because it's, you know, doing the fracking in the work, and to hear you say that now, I'm really excited that I figured that out. So wonderful. And Yona, yours is interesting because you talked about sonnets in
Right.
your poem, and then you did have a sonnet, but it was a non-traditional sonnet, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, yes, for sure. Because I am hard-headed and I have a hard time adhering to rules. So that's part of it. I also love, like Ted, I love knots forms. So I like to make up the constraints myself sometimes. And that helps me to be wilder and freer in terms of the content. So yeah, in that poem, The Sonnet District, I'm engaging, trying to figure out at the time when I was writing it, like engaging my ex-husband who's also a poet. So, you know, just playing little games, like there's a lot of 14-line words in that poem rather than it being like a sonnet. So just things that are charged emotionally, just trying to figure out how to have fun and not like shrink from the difficulty of it.
I think it also succeeded at putting language under pressure. You know, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And Linda, I could not find a sonnet in any of your books because I thought that would be something we could all talk about. But you do like couplets. Would you agree? You do have a lot of couplet poems,
You know,
or several anyway.
Rarely. I have to say, I never think about form. I only think about the language and how it resonates, how one word resonates with another. And then where, you know, like I think about a line break, perhaps, changing the meaning of something. But I have never thought about form in any of my work. And I probably need to
think about it in a
learn.
more audio way.
What?
Sorry, go ahead. I said, do you think about it maybe in a more audio way, like through
I
listening?
do. I hear it. I just hear the poem coming into being. And so I write what's in my unconscious, I guess. I never know what I'm going to say. I never know how it's going to turn out or the shape it will take on a page. I just don't know what. It's a mystery to me. The writing is a total mystery. And I think if I tried to put something into a form, for me, to adhere to rules of a form would be, and not saying this against anybody or about anything, it's just that for me it wouldn't work. It would inhibit the words and their meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's wonderful that we don't all do things the same way and that we don't all experience poetry the same way. And I'm so sorry to have to end. I just really wish I could talk to you guys for so much longer. I'd love to thank you all for coming. I'd love to thank our wonderful audience. It looks like we had like over 100 people here today, which is amazing and wonderful. And again, I would like to encourage all of you to pick up these books. If you click on the Buy Books link there, It'll take you straight to Majors and Quinn bookstore, and Twin Cities Book Festival does get a little bit of the proceeds for that, which is really great, and our authors get read and sell some books, and we would just really appreciate it if all of you would support them in their efforts and just enjoy these amazing books. So thank you all so much for coming. Let's give them a virtual round of applause, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kris. Thank you, Yona. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ted.
And I feel honored to read with Yona, with both of you, Ted and Yoni. I think I said your name wrong.
Thank you.
Yona. Yona.